Is the question and answer format related to the different way teaching was done in those days with more of a recitation?
Well, yes, I think in part it would be because you know the stories of students in Hodges' class where they were basically expected to regurgitate by memorization and recitation, interaction of what they had learned from him. And I think that rote kind of learning, while some consider it boring, is actually very effective in developing theological muscle memory, so that people are able to reproduce the content and to also learn to use the right words to speak in a concise, lucid fashion. And I think that Alexander's simplicity of speech, and everyone was amazed at him as a preacher. In fact, some people walked out on his preaching because they came to hear a great orator. And one person said, "I just heard an old man stand up and just talk and talk." And and there were some lawyers, because he wanted you to speak naturally. And
Right.
so he understood that, true eloquence is rooted in the character of the heart, and that in
Yes.
speaking naturally, we can speak eloquently because we give expression to the convictions of whatever the topic is that we're seeking to address. And I think that simplicity for which he was known, both in his lifestyle as well as in his preaching, also comes through. And ask yourself the question, how would you teach these things to a 17-year-old or an
Right.
18-year-old or a 19-year-old? Now, these are young men coming in who already probably know Greek and Latin. Maybe you're learning Hebrew and understand something of the classics. So I don't want to minimize who they were. In fact, they were probably far more advanced than many of us today for what they got in their classical background. But he was working with that age group predominantly. And so, what's the best way to maximize their time and also the limited number of books available? And
Right.
so, if you're having to hand translate, which he did initially because books were not available, no internet archive for Archibald to tap in on, doing your research in 2 months. I stood at a copy machine at Princeton all day long at one point in the mid 1990s, Xeroxing page after page of
Yeah.
handwritten lecture notes in 2 months. But at any rate, that was, I think, the world that they were living in. And we have to kind of enter back into that world in terms of their pedagogy and the available resources that were there for students who were studying by candlelight in a lot of cases, and daylight, etc. And what's the best way to learn the heart of what you need to know and to focus it that way? And in my own experience, being the simple person that I am, I like to read a variety of authors on the same topic, but I often read the most basic and popular authors to see how they communicated this and if they communicated it faithfully. And if I can understand that, I follow the breadcrumb trails back as I go deeper into that subject matter. But by beginning there, it gives me the framework rather than trying to stumble into it and wonder what this is really about and what are the important things I need to know or remember. And I think that's where he has a strength with the simplicity and the succinctness of what's there in a busy world, that you could digest that information. It will lead you to ask questions. What's he talking about? Who's he talking about? Because it is a conversation that's larger than what Hodges recorded. He's given the digest of it, but it hopefully will stimulate you to look a little bit further and open up visas of understanding in those topics.
So that's good to note that this is not necessarily a verbatim transcript. That there is some selectivity going on with Hodge, and in fact, it's the kind of selectivity that a professor would want his students to have. The contemporary discussion about whether you have laptops or notebooks in the classroom is related to that. If you type what you hear, it tends to be a bare transcript, whereas if you handwrite, you have to select.
Mhm.
And professors have generally come down on the side of handwriting because it requires the student to do some assessment. And so that's not a bad thing that we're looking at Hodges' assessment of what was important in the lectures that he heard. So that gives us some insight into Hodge as well as to Alexander.
And the thing I found amazing in reading Samuel Miller's material, he actually stood at a bench and wrote. And he understood the damage that can be done as a student if you're sitting hunched over in a chair. and he admonished against it. And he said, it's not good for your physical health. And he was way ahead of ergonomics when it comes to back posture and the importance of uprightness and even diet as it pertains to your learning ability.
That's something Edwards was keen on, keeping a record of his diet and how it affected his studies. But I've got this standing desk now. I feel like I'm old school.
There you go.
You're in the old Princeton tradition.
Yeah,
now.
yeah, right.
Standing desk.
I like it.